Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the historical context of the events, the historical ramifications of those events, and other interesting things, like some people that were born on those days and some people that died on those days. So let's take a look at this day in history, February the 12th. And on this day, in 1733, James Oglethorpe came ashore in what would become the state of Georgia. He founded the 13th and last of the original 13 British colonies in the United States, and would settle at Savannah, which would become the colonial capital. So, the colony of Georgia, founded on this day in 1733. Now, this next event, I had serious debate when I discovered another famous person born on February the 12th. And amazingly enough, not only does this person share the same birth date, but they were born in the same exact year. Two titans of history that would have profound effects on world history, and unfortunately, their work would be demonized in my region of the country. Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin. And I believe both are seminal figures in history, deserving of immense information delved out by me about them to you. So, I decided the fair way to do it is I will cover Lincoln today on the day of his birth, and Darwin on the day of his death in April. So, born on this day in 1809 in Sinking Spring Farm in Kentucky was born Abraham Lincoln, who would go on to become the 16th president of the United States, serving from 1861 until his assassination in 1865. Lincoln is the greatest president this country ever had or ever will have. Lincoln saw the country through the Civil War. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, pushed through the 13th Amendment, and was unfortunately murdered by a crazed assassin before it could be fully ratified by the states. But Lincoln saw the evil of slavery and fought to end it. I cannot say enough good things about Lincoln. Just reading about his leadership style, the way he conducted himself is just mind-blowing. Every president since Lincoln has tried to model themselves after Lincoln. Some have come close, and others have failed. But no one looks at Lincoln and says, man, that's a bad president, and gets elected president. I'm kind of an oddball in the South. I've always admired Abraham Lincoln. I've always thought that Abraham Lincoln is the greatest president in this country's history. When you think about not only what he did, what he overcome, when he became president, he had already buried one child. While president, during the Civil War, he buried another child. And this child was arguably the apple of his eye, the one that really was just, I hate to say favorite, but was Lincoln's favorite. And this sent um, President Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln into a despair of misery that a lot of historians now believe Miss Lincoln never recovered from, and that her husband's death and the death of her another child after the president's assassination just sent her into complete, you know, mental unrest. Her oldest son, and the only son that survived into adulthood, actually had his mother committed um, later in her life to an insane asylum because he was so concerned about her. Um, when you Lincoln goes on from a dirt floor to learn, become a huge fan of books. He pilots a paddle boat down the Mississippi River, sees the evil of slavery for the first time in New Orleans, and is just confronted by that evil, abject system. And probably that event set in course his desire to end it. He becomes a successful lawyer, is elected to the Illinois state legislature, um, serves a single term in the House of Representatives, uh, fails in a Senate bid, achieves the nomination of a new political party, and is elected President of the United States of America. And then states, one after another in the South, say they're succeeding because they're so fearful of what they, that he's going to try to end this system of slavery. They don't even want to negotiate with him. And at the start of his term, Lincoln did say, if I could have saved the Union without freeing a single slave, I would have. But during the war, he began to see that the moral imperative was for freeing the slaves. That you couldn't end the war any other way. And I know a lot of Southern people get hung up on this notion that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Yes, it was. It was about slavery in every sense of the word. Because I've heard some Southern people, well, they were trying just to preserve their way of life. What was that way of life? It was holding people in slavery. End of discussion. That's what it was about. And I think they need to be honest about that. So, I'm a firm believer in the Lincoln as greatest president mythology. I'm firmly in that camp. He was also, as I said, he ran on the ticket of a new political party. He was the first Republican president. And he assembled a team around him of people that had ran against him for president, who had different ideals about how to go about this. There were people in his ranks who were, somewhat squishy on the issue of slavery. He had people that were more of a let's see what we can do road. And he had radical Republicans in his ranks. And he brought them all together and said, he took all their ideals and made decisions that he felt was best for the nation. I visited the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield, Illinois over the summer. I visited Abraham Lincoln's home just down the road from the museum. I visited his gravesite there in Springfield. I visited the old state capitol where Lincoln gave the House Divided speech, the very building where Lincoln served as a legislator. And they have his desk commemorated by a top hat, of course, that is associated with Lincoln. And the whole time I walked around Springfield and visited these places and just got the sense of history, I came away with a newfound appreciation for Lincoln. I'd always known about Mary Todd Lincoln's depression over the death of their son in the White House, Willie. I don't think that I knew Lincoln's was as deep as it was. And to think, after this, the Emancipation Proclamation comes, the Atlanta campaign, the death and despair of a civil war, and then he runs for re-election. And it's hard for us to believe now, but in 1864, Abraham Lincoln and his advisors seriously thought that there was a chance that he would lose the general election. Of course, he goes on to win it. But he had to make contingency plans on what to do between Election Day and the inauguration of the new president should he lose. Of course, he never had to put those into action. But just everything about him screams presidential greatness. And no president will ever come eclipse him. Because let me repeat. I hope no president is ever faced with what he was faced with again. A nation just torn to shreds at war with each other. And I think Lincoln's greatest legacy, besides, preserving the Union, slavery, and all that, those are admirable things. But the one thing I think Lincoln should be, above all, remembered for is his decision not to seek a declaration of war against the South. He declared them to be he called it it was an insurrection. Therefore, it denied the South legitimacy to claim that they were a sovereign nation, sue for peace, and it also set the precedent that you cannot succeed from the Union. So, Abraham Lincoln. Deaths that have occurred on this day. In 2019, at the age of 96, Lyndon LaRouche died. And I would talk about how LaRouche died and where he died if his organization had announced those things when he died. All they announced was that Lyndon LaRouche died. Lyndon LaRouche is one of the oddest and strangest characters ever to appear on the American political scene in the post-World War II era. He was a candidate of third parties and Democratic primaries every presidential election from 1976 until 2004. In 1996, he managed to get 5% of the national Democratic vote in primaries. Although his delegates weren't seated, they were disqualified at the convention. just had some really zany conspiracy theories and um, political beliefs. He was a former socialist, amazingly enough. Yeah. If you ever have the chance, go do some research on Lyndon LaRouche. As I said, one of the crazier characters on the American political scene in the post-World War II era. Uh, definitely, definitely an original. Okay, a quick word. New Hampshire reaction video is coming probably tomorrow. Um, Probably not going to be able to get it out tonight. I got to do a little bit more research, finish up everything, but it's probably coming out sometime in the morning. So you can look forward to that with your cup of coffee, my reaction to New Hampshire. And it's quite the reaction. So I'll see y'all all then and tomorrow for This Day in History.